Welcome to Deadly Days, Tales of Dark Fantasy. I'm Joe Bandel, your host. Today is a story from the Orchidean Garden, the world's first illustrated fantasy magazine in the world. It came out in 1919. Let's see here. Yep, and this is number 5. So today's story is The Cannibal Club by Wilhem Nihl. Nihl, I think. Um, anyway, before I start this, uh, this is episode 81. So there's 81 stories. Got lots of stories still to go. I missed last week, so I'm going to try to put 2 in this week if I can. I really love these stories. It's just that life's been kind of crazy right now, and it didn't work out. But I think we just make it happen. So I translate these from the German, and a lot of them they've never been translated before. I have novels and books with short stories. Visit my bookstore at bandelbooks.com, and you can find links to everything there. Uh, it's a work in progress, but it'll get you started. You can find hardcovers. You can get a book as a hardcover, soft cover, or an ebook. And what I do is I try to do that to keep the costs down. So you want something from me, that's where you're going to find it. Anyway, the Cannibal Club. The reporter Philip Stork wanted to inform the readers of his paper on the situation concerning the vegetable markets, and in order to gather material for an enlightened professional presentation, assaulted a commercial gardener, an outstanding specialist in this area. But now he could not use it, as closer clarification of the desired information caused the visitor to be dragged through the farmer's facilities, where only those with a marked interest in the topic would view and listen. Namely, he had more than enough for his article and lie in wait for the next best opportunity to get away from his overeager guide. "What is that?" he asked in boredom, and pointed to a plant bed in one of the greenhouses in an effort to get the commercial gardener to stop his lengthy lecture. He was informed that it was a patch of nightshade, whose application was unknown to the gardener. It was supposed to be named Borodina. A gentleman had brought the seeds, and the cultivation of them required an advantageous contract. The berries of the plants went to the little innkeeper in the suburbs. So the journalist got the name, Peter Quill, and the address, and in despicable ingratitude to his mentor, made his escape. In the editorial office during an idle moment, Stork looked in the conversation lexicon and discovered that the berries of the Borodina, Solanum anthropophagorum, were used as a spice in the cannibalistic meals of the Fiji Islanders and several others as well. Journalists are known to be gullible people, and they think that anything is possible. And so Stork decided to investigate the matter for his own private amusement. He was quite young. Newspaper reporting was still fun for him, and he constantly dreamed of writing a sensational and original report, which would place him in the top row tier of newspaper reporters. Still, He forgot the matter until one day he had to cover an insignificant murder in the suburbs, and on his way there discovered the sign of Peter Quill's Inn. That was when he remembered his earlier plan. Because he was a reporter with the police, it was not difficult for him to get information about the innkeeper, whose close acquaintance with the authorities included various offenses he had already committed. Peter Quill had been a ship's cook and had met his future wife and love, Stein, in a South African brothel where she used the more pompous name Arabella. And since the hard-working girl had some savings, he married her. Now he ran a small inn with her, which he gallantly named Buenos Aires, in memory of his wife's successes and dealt in exotics. Everything that was related to overseas and everything that was a little unusual could be found in his place. He had parrots that had mastered several languages, or he could even forge a passport. And if an unprejudiced girl wanted to go abroad and earn her bread in the most natural way, he could find a place for her. In short, Peter Quill was a man that a prudent reporter likes to keep tabs on, because sooner or later it could turn into a handsome number of lines. So Stork focused his attention on Buenos Aires. It was clear that he would need a lot of patience, but Upton Sinclair had not discovered the mess of Chicago's slaughterhouses in one day. It was a restriction that he could only do research on Quill, in addition to the regular work demanded for the operation of his newspaper. On the way to work and on the way home, he took a route past Buenos Aires. He made the acquaintance of Peter Quill and told himself that the fat, genial fellow with the honest look was still to be found in the pictures of the criminal album. And something would show up. But useful material did not appear. Slowly, the journalist began to doubt the wisdom of the conversational lexicon and suspected that Borodina might have less interesting applications, like, for example, against rheumatism or cough. It was desperately little that he found out, namely that the ship's cook had the habit of operating his rarely visited restaurant at irregular times, occasionally at 9:30. The inn would already be closed, and even though the people in the little ground-level house were certainly still not asleep. That could be on account of the weather, or if you served a soul snatcher and he lurked around the house for days waiting for the death of an important person in order to report it to the editorial office. His was a business, by the way, that requires a fatalistic patience. As Stork once peeked through the keyhole of the courtyard gate, he noticed a light that could only be coming from Quill's dwelling, falling on the small courtyard. Because the glow moved and then became dark, it showed that people were moving around in the room. Stork decided to risk a couple hours of sleep. First, he sat in a coffee house of threadbare velvet splendor, situated on the street corner, which served as a place of recreation for peripatetic ladies, but fled when his lack of interest in their advances made him extremely unpopular. He went back to the dark side of the street where he wandered, enduring the suspicious looks of a passing policeman with journalistic equanimity. It was around 1 o'clock when a group of 7 people scurried out of Peter Quill's house door. 5 gentlemen and 2 ladies, who diligently strove to remain inconspicuous, but seemed overcome with a heated liveliness. The 2 women cooed now and then with nervous excitement, like after a night of love or passionate dancing. 4 of the men snorted as in the aftermath of gluttony, while the feelings of the 5th did not appear to rise above those of having had a middle-class supper. You could smell the mood of excess in the group, except for this one who did not share it. One of the ladies, a long figure with bright yellow hair and chewing noises in her speech, was professionally known to the reporter. She was Flossie Foulding, supposedly an Englishwoman, who had appeared a few years ago in the cabaret as a scantily clad introductory number, but in private circles her monumental depravity exerted such an attraction on the living world that she renounced all further public appearances. Since then, several more defrauders had been arrested, for which Foulding had also been imprisoned. It would be impossible for a competent reporter to not recognize this lady. The companions walked a common path for a long time. Then a passing automobile stopped, and 5 drove away. Stork noted the number of the car and the taxi company. 2 gentlemen continued on foot as the feelings of being a normal citizen stabilized. One radiated a pastoral serenity, and the younger, an excited person with a pince-nez who with stuttering haste asked a lot of questions. It turned out that he accompanied the pastor, and it seemed that the affable professor and the knowledge-seeking youth were in learned conversation with each other. In front of the pastor's house a long colloquium developed, and Stork, not wanting to be conspicuous, passed by them and wandered to the next dark corner, getting the impression that they were talking about the time-honored cannibal traditions of the Wambo Nambo. When the pastor finally satisfied the boy's thirst for knowledge at his house door, the reporter then followed the other in order to get 2 addresses in one blow. The next day, Stork determined the chauffeur of the car and thus the addresses of the 5 occupants, and further investigation revealed the personal data of the persons concerned, from the talkative, all-knowing caretakers, the refuge and recourse of all reporters, who delivered the raw material. Flossie Foulding was firmly engaged for some inexplicable reason with the ennobled young snob, Baron Otto of Marlatti. It seemed that he so thoroughly partook of all life's inclinations, including opium, that only the most jaded sensations would arouse him. The second couple was Matthias Pardelzorg, a fattened merchant from the colonies with all kinds of European notions, strange habits, and his love, Felicitas Oliva, a greasy prostitute from an undetermined southern zone. Then there was one more, the gaunt, wizened gentleman, Fred Hamlock, who described himself as a tropical hunter and explorer, but without further consideration could be judged as a cosmopolitan adventurer. The pastoral one, who in daylight looked like a genuine superintendent, was named Martin Lorman, and was an adopted medicine man. As a young man, he had gone on a scientific expedition, which in their overeager optimism was a disaster. Martin was captured by the natives and intended for their victory meal, but achieved not only culinary but also the human sympathies of influential personalities. So he went from being the feast to rising to the all-round popular and revered medicine man of the tribe. He performed this office through decades with deep inner satisfaction, until an overzealous English hunting party, which received a highly distorted impression of his existing tribal relationship, and despite his protests, freed him from supposed slavery and brought him back to Europe in triumph. The young man of the group was named Ferdinand Ziebler, an eternal student who who in an agonizing search for knowledge had visited all universities and attempted all disciplines without being able to bring his studies to an end. About 3 weeks later, on his way home, Stork found Peter Quill's inn closed early once more. At first, he crept around the enclosure in the dark, but then, with much effort, he climbed onto the latch of the gate and swung a leg over into the courtyard. As he sat astride the gate and tried to pull his other leg up, he was seized and requested to go with the policeman. The incident was embarrassing for Stork for 2 reasons. First, because he was not a particularly good acrobat and had to cancel his climbing without any results, and secondly, because he had to explain his own questionable actions and reveal his secret. As Stork tried hard to get back down onto the streets, the other identified himself as an agent of the police, and Stork somewhat indignantly identified himself as a journalist, much to the disappointment of his apprehender. Then Stork shared his suspicions, which at first brought lively disbelief from the agent. Fortunately, the man was also ambitious, and so they agreed to a common approach and the safeguarding of their professional interests. Together they climbed the gate and crept through the courtyard up close to a lighted window. They were curtained below, but one of the higher shutters was open, which is why they both with great care climbed the rain gutter to be able to look into the room from above. Stork found 7 sitting at a festive table besides the ship's cook and his wife as waitress. At first it seemed a perfectly harmless group of table companions, and in all honesty that was probably what it was. Stork was pale with nervousness because he feared the enormous embarrassment. No doubt his reporter's imagination had placed him in a most embarrassing position. Timidly he looked over at his companion, who was motionlessly following the proceedings. The superintendent, the medicine man Lorman, ate with focused introspection and seemed in his element. He was obviously considered a connoisseur because he was repeatedly asked for his opinion. "I don't know," he pontificated, "if it is because of the ancient cooking culture of the Wambo Nambo or because of the climate. In my memory, I have a more spicy taste to the meat. Here I only sense a faint trace of that taste. I thought that the Borodina berries would help. In any case, it is no fault of our honest Quill, and in Europe it is even better not to have it." "It is an old experience," said the thin, wizened one at the head of the table, the tropical hunter Hemlock, "that each climate has its own special foods, which you can't duplicate in other areas." He gave his approval with the calm of a man who had eaten in all parts of the world by eating another piece. "I have also read that," said Ziebler, the young man with the pince nez. Drops of sweat stood out on his forehead, and he took frequent breaks while eating. "I don't have as much experience in these things as Mr. Lorman," snorted Parzelsorg, the fat merchant from the colonies. "But I find the 17-year-old leaves nothing to be desired. A tender, juicy white meat almost like veal." "Where did you get this again?" Folding asked the ship's cook, and gnawed lustfully on a bone with her eyes closed. Peter Quill smiled, his most radiant host smiled. "You know how it is with the medics. They know what is valuable. The young suicide was a pretty girl." His mouth snapped as if he had said too much. You should never ask for the origin of a dish, replied the fat, dark-skinned woman that called herself Felicitas Olivia, and her wrinkles were smoothed with makeup. With a shudder, Stork saw that she was eating something that resembled a cow's udder. She celebrated the meal with a fervor as if it were a mystical act. You should never look in the kitchen either, said Baron Marlotti, the dandy. If you ever looked into a Chinese kitchen, you would swear to never eat there again. Human flesh has something for itself, lectured the superintendent. There is a deep sense that cannibalism is often practiced out of honorable religious motives. One receives the power of the relevant one. And one also acquires their youth, right? Asked Olivia. The wizened one cast a glance at her worn-out face and said sarcastically, "Just keep eating, Signora." The agent whispered to Stork that he now needed to get assistance. The reporter also had enough. He followed the policeman over the courtyard gate, and as the policeman disappeared, he lit a highly longed-for cigar, which even young medical students crave after their first dissection experience. The extraction of the company occurred under the customary confusion of those involved, and as they were dragged out of the room to ensure the remains of the gruesome meal, Stork remained for a moment alone at the table. He was filled with dread at the sight of the roasted flesh, but was also determined to enrich his collection of sensational experiences and taste a piece of human flesh. If he then, in later years, like the journalist Nestor, published his memoirs, it would produce the effect that he was a connoisseur in the area of cannibalism and able to give judgment. And then he could write, "I must frankly admit that the strange dish tasted quite good," and it would make a wicked but extremely distinctive impression. So he tasted a piece. He still had time to tear open the window before vomiting violently. The incident would not change anything. In his memoirs, he would still boast of the peculiar taste test. The first interrogation confirmed Stork's circumstantial evidence. Olivia was the first to confess, through a stream of tears, her enjoyment of human flesh. She did not like the taste, but wanted to become young. After that, Ziebler admitted to having eaten some to broaden his horizons. By and by, the rest of them also confessed. Only Quill and his wife stubbornly denied. Stork raced into the office, where the night editor, getting the impression that it had to do with lunatics, was overcome, and despite the advanced hour and the hand-wringing of the copy editor, as much space was provided as he wanted. Even the continuation of the novel was sacrificed. The effect of the original report the next morning was monstrous, and the other papers paled with envy and took up the case in their evening editions. Unfortunately, some harm was done to that effect the next morning when the paper had to report that upon examining the remains of the meal, it was determined to be veal and cow's udder. And finally, it was properly proven that the busy Quill had never served his cannibalistic-minded guests anything other than genuine beef or pork. They could not punish the pleasant host for falsification of food, but were able to nab him with the help of the fraud paragraph because he charged his customers excessive prices for their meals. The main casualty was the reporter Stork, who cared about the success of his article and saw this as a betrayal of his efforts. This chapter would also be in his memoirs. Unfortunately, it would be far less effective and needed to be colored with irony. The remainder came out of the interrogation room and their adventure in roundabout ways. Martin Lorman's stay in Europe was completely ruined. He tried once more to return to the Wambo Mambo, but they already had a real missionary as medicine man. Currently, the superintendent is sending requests to all the better cannibal tribes and is dealing with the Manjoima Manbutu, Niam Niam, Basudu, Kashibu, and South Sea Islanders. And that's the end of that interesting and tasteful story. Till next week, thank you.